So, what's the first decision you have to make when you think about writing a book? And what's the most important decision? You might be surprised. Hi, everybody. I'm Rikki Heller from rikkiheller.com. I'm a writer, book coach, and editor, and I help you clarify and organize your ideas so you can write your book to get your message out in the very best way possible while still sounding like you. And you might actually find you discover a little bit more about yourself along the way. So I wanted to address that question because I think sometimes people feel that perhaps the answer to what is the first decision you make when you write a book and what is the most important decision you make when you write a book are the same. And you might be surprised to find they are not. What's your first decision? Well, you have to decide, what am I going to write about? If you don't have an idea, if you don't have some kind of subject matter, obviously you do not have a book. So that's the first decision, but it's not the most important one. The most important decision, after you figure out what your general subject matter is how do you publish your work? Because now, for the first time in history, we have this whole array of choices that we never had before. I was a bit surprised to find out that the very first self-published book happened in 1979. Not that long ago, right? And from there, the next big change was print on demand, which is what you can get if you work with Amazon and they print the book on demand. In other words, as somebody orders it, they print it. Otherwise, it doesn't exist as a printed book. So now we have all these self-publishing options. We have the traditional option, which is, do I work with a publisher? And then there's all kinds of what they call hybrid or vanity presses in between. So you have many, many choices. And surprisingly, depending on which choice you make around publishing, that's going to completely change step number two, step number three, step number four, how you write the book, how the timeline works for the book, all of those things. So when I self-published my first food and nutrition related book, which was called Sweet Freedom, it was completely self-published. That was before the days of print on demand. And my husband luckily agreed to do some of the design work for me. So we had to literally create the files, design the book, design like the layout, the font, everything. And then we had to go hire a printer to actually turn that into paper books and sell them ourselves. That is not the way most self-published books are done today. As I said, now there's print on demand. But I also worked with a publisher for my last two books, which were both what are called, one was a private publisher and one was called a Big Five publisher, which is one of the big names in New York. So slightly different experience there. But in general, working with a publisher also is a similar process. So if you work with a small publisher or a big publisher, if it's what's called a conventional or a traditional publisher, the process is pretty much the same. And what I found, and then I get asked, what's your preference? What do you think is a better way for me to publish my book? And I'm going to tell you my answer is, it depends. Yeah, I know it's not what you wanted to hear, but it really does depend on what your goals are, what your timeline is, all kinds of things. But the main difference between the two is how much control remains with the author on all different levels. So if you are someone who is more interested in that, you may opt for self-publishing, but there are absolute pros and cons with both. More difficulties in some areas with self-publishing, more difficulties in other areas with traditional publishing. And it really depends on what your goals are. So you need to think about that. You need to really consider all the different pros and cons for each before you decide which way you're going to go. I'm going to be talking about this in great detail in my upcoming Before the Book workshop, the entire world of publishing and what are the specific differences between the different kinds of publishing. I'm also going to be talking about what happens right after you come up with that first decision of your subject matter. What do you do with that? How do you then decide what the actual book's going to be about? Because people tell me all the time that they have so many ideas. They just don't know how to order them. They need some kind of structure around their ideas. They need somebody to give them feedback to recognize what are the ways these ideas fit together when they feel like there are just too many to create some kind of order out of the chaos. So I'm going to be talking about that. I'm going to be talking about the timeline. How do you actually write your book? You know, it's sometimes for some people, I was just talking to someone this morning who said to me, I could write it, but I don't feel like I'm a great writer, and I actually don't want to be the writer. I don't feel like spending the time required to do the writing. So what happens if that's you? You're great, you have the gift of gab, you love talking, you could talk about this thing all day, but you just don't feel like you could actually write the book. So all of these considerations, and then a Q&A at the end for all of your answers. I'm going to be talking about that on March 21st, 2024 at 2 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to leave a link to sign up for the workshop in the show notes here. But if you have any other questions, please do feel free to email me at ricky@rickyheller.com or just tag me on Instagram, send me a DM on Instagram, and I will be more than happy to answer your questions about the workshop. I mean, for me, learning about the whole world of publishing, that's a whole other learning curve besides actually writing the book. And I want people to feel comfortable that they understand the whole process from idea to publication before they sit down to write. And that makes it so much easier for you to dive in and actually get that manuscript done. So if that's you and you have questions, you have concerns, you're not sure if this is something you could do, please do join us on the 21st. And as I said, let me know if you have any further questions. I'd be happy to answer them. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining me again today, and I will see you again next time. Take care.